If you saw my recent long time no see video, you'll remember that I mentioned this E53 was going to be my next project. It's been sitting at my buddy's house for a few years, and he keeps saying he'll call his friend who has a tow truck and get it towed over to my place. But he kept lagging. But I finally realized, hey, I have AAA. So I called him up and got it handled. Hey guys, I'm the 50s Kid. Welcome to the beginning of the E53 restoration project. If you're a longtime viewer of the channel, you recognize this E53. I've done a number of videos on it in the past. Things like power steering pump and rear wheel bearing and suspension components, things like that. So this vehicle it's a lot similar to my E46. It's one of the ones that just has a lot of gremlins. You know, there always seem to be issues. And it doesn't help the fact that this thing has sat for a number of years. It just sat for 3 years. It's probably sat for as long as it's been alive. It's a 2001. You know, various reasons why that's happened, but this last time was kind of my fault. You know, all those things that happened in my life, which you guys know about from a previous video. I never got around to kind of going over there and diagnosing what's wrong with this thing so we can get it back on the road, and it just sat again for 3 years. So I feel bad about that, and it is time to give this thing some love. It's time to get it back on the road and kind of restore it a little bit. So definitely what we're going to do is fix the no start condition that it has now. We're going to do that in this video. The next video, we're definitely going to do the job of changing the timing chain guides, because those will explode on you with this family of engines. So you definitely need to do that job. And then I noticed that the rear airbag suspension on this, one of the sides is leaking, so we got to do a change out on those. And I do have a new hood. I know it looks horrible. I know I was in the middle of fixing the paint on it and I never got around to that a long time ago, and I'm going to fix it now. I have a new hood actually. We just got over the weekend. It's a lot better. Not perfect, but much better than what this is, and it'll be good to kind of get it by for now. And the car needs other paint, you can see on the top. Maybe I'll tackle that. I'm not going to promise that yet because I'm still a little bummed about the last paint job that I did. Anyway, enough rambling. Let's get started. All right, like I said, this thing has a no start condition, and I was in here diagnosing it the other day. So it hadn't run in 3 years, and I wasn't entirely sure why it wasn't running. The story is, guy was driving it home and it just stopped on the side of the road, and I was nearby. We had just come back from a party, both of us, and so I jumped over to where he was, and I kind of did some quick side of the road diagnostics. And I mean, I don't even really remember everything I did, but I believe what I did definitely was take the Schrader valve cap off on the fuel line and push it, and you know, it had fuel. What happened was we started it up, it ran for a brief second, then it died. In my mind, I'm thinking fuel pump, you know, but the fact that it had a little bit of fuel pressure was kind of weird. Anyway, we had it towed, and like I said, I never got back to it. I never got to do it. Got to go and do a full diagnostic. Since it's sat for 3 years, I didn't want to just start cranking it again without kind of making sure that nothing else was wrong with it. So I actually removed the coil packs and I removed the spark plugs, and I barred the engine over by hand. I just wanted to make sure that, like, you know, I didn't know if the timing chain had exploded on this thing and then the timing was like out, because I figured, you know, if it had fuel, and it was very likely that it had spark too. Like you know, I figured if it had both of those things, then okay, maybe the timing's off, and that's why it started and ran for a second and then died, you know, or it didn't even run for a second, it just barely ran and then died. I was like, I don't know, is the timing off? I have no idea, because the timing chain guides exploded, and I didn't know, and I didn't know if the timing was off. I didn't know if the valves were now out of sync with the pistons, and you know, maybe if I started cranking it, one of the pistons would crash into the valves. I just didn't want to take that chance, so I removed the spark plugs and I just kind of barred the engine over just to see if I could feel anything hitting, you know, but nothing. Everything was completely smooth. So at that point, I disabled the fuel pump by removing fuse 47, and I cranked the engine over for quite a little bit. I was trying to get oil pumped back into the thing. You know, again, when the engine sits for a while, you want to get the oil pump moving a little bit and get some oil pumped into the engine before you start cranking it for real. So I did that, everything's good. So I put the plugs back in, put the coil packs back in, put the fuel pump fuse back in, and the thing will not start. And I was noticing, when I first came here to check this fuel rail, I pushed it in, it did have
fuel squirted out like it's doing here right now. And so I emptied it completely. I just kind of pushed the Schrader valve in until all the fuel had come out. And then I proceeded to crank it. Then I came back and checked it again, and there was no fuel pressure at all. So, okay, that's great. That's something to go on. So my immediate next step is to grab my power probe, because that's just convenient for me. It's a quick, fast way to check and see if the fuel pump is running. Now, there's all kinds of ways you can diagnose the fuel pump circuit. You could start at the fuse and then go to the relay, fuel pump relay, and then finally go back to the fuel pump, just kind of trying to diagnose your way through the circuit. But I find it's just better and easier to go right to the fuel pump and see if that thing's dead or not, because they kind of have, they're known for dying, especially on this car. So let's go. I'll show you what I did. Okay, you get to the fuel pump from inside the car in the back seat. You basically pull the back seat up. It just kind of, it pops up. All you have to do is pull it and pull it aside. And the fuel pump is over here on the right side of the engine. It's just 4 10mm fasteners. You can pull that cover off like that. So with this connector, you just pull it back like this. As you see, you gotta get it way back. Hang on. Like that, and it'll just kind of pop out of there. Now, as you see on this connector, there are 2 fat wires and there are 2 skinny wires. The 2 skinny wires are the fuel level sensor, and the 2 fat wires are the actual power for the fuel pump. Now, the power, I believe, is on the brown wire, and the negative, the ground, is on the white wire. So that would mean that this is our negative and that's power. So we're going to take the power probe. Now, power probe is, I realize not everybody has one. It's like $100. It's a, it's a diagnostic tool, but it's super convenient for providing power to something. You do not need to have a power probe. All you need are 2 wires that you've hooked to the battery. But I just happen to have this handy, so I grabbed it. What everybody says about working with one hand is, they're right, it's super awkward. Dude, look at this. I swear I did not drop my power probe, but it's cracked right here. I'm so bummed about that. I barely use this thing. So when you push the button forward, it's going to provide 12 volts. So first step here, provide 12 volts to the fuel pump, and I hear it running. So what's going on there, right? Fuel pump's running. Let's go back and check and see if we have fuel pressure. See if we have fuel pressure here. See, no fuel pressure there. You notice that? Nothing squirted out. I had that fuel pump running for a little bit. It should have pressurized the rail. Now, I got to admit, I did not come back here and check for that fuel pressure right away when I was doing my diagnostic. When I heard that fuel pump running, when I applied power to it with the power probe, I was like, what the hell? This car's still not starting. I plugged it back in, tried to start it again, car's still not starting. So I'm just like, okay, what's going on here? Maybe there's no power going to it, because when you're cranking the engine, you can't really hear if the fuel pump's running or not. And on this car, when you turn the key on, it doesn't prime the fuel pump like it does on the E46. So I couldn't tell if the fuel pump is running or not. I didn't have a friend here to kind of go back there, hold his hand on the fuel pump or stick his ear to it and tell me if it's running when I'm cranking it. So my next step was to start to diagnose the electrical circuit. Let me show you what I did. So a power probe is really great as a diagnostic tool for providing power to a circuit or ground to a circuit. I really love that it has such a long cord. It's super convenient for testing fuel pumps or testing taillight bulbs, when you have to kind of hook to the battery in the engine compartment and you need a set of wires all the way in the back of the car. So it's just super convenient for that. It's a good voltmeter and everything, but the one thing that it isn't is a test light. It doesn't have the ability to put a circuit under load and tell you if that circuit is capable of carrying current and powering the device. But a test light is capable of doing that, a simple $10 test light. What we're going to do is hook our test light to ground, and we are going to, what did I say it was? The brown wire over here, right here. Brown wire is power. So let's stick this up here so that we can see it. And get you guys to where you can see it. I'm gonna try to start the car. Hang on a second. Do I have that wire wrong? Aha! All right, so I was wrong there. It's the white wire is power. Now I gotta be honest with you, this is different than this behavior right here is different from what I was seeing the other day when I was diagnosing this thing. Neither one of these circuits worked with this test light. I was completely baffled by this. So at that point, I kind of went to checking the fuse over here. Let me get in here. So what I did was I pulled down the glove box. It's basically, you know, screws along the top. There's a screw down in here, screw down in here. You take the glove box down, and then this fuse panel is actually bolted up by 2 screws here and here, and then 2 along the bottom here, bottom over here. So the fuse panel comes down, and this is your fuel pump relay. And at this point, I was just kind of into diagnosing the whole fuel pump circuit. I checked the fuse, which is fuse 47. You should have a little diagram that's right here in your glove panel. You can figure out which fuse is 47. You know, it's a fuse right here. So fuse 47 and I believe fuse 51 are involved in the fuel pump circuit. Both of those checked out fine. So I suspected that my relay was bad. One thing I did was I just swapped these 2 relays, figuring you can't have 2 dead relays at the same time. Very unlikely. That did not seem to solve the problem. So first what I did was I got a loop of wire, and you want to connect pins 30, which is out here, which is right here, and 87, which is the bottom one. So if you connect those 2 things, it'll provide power to that fuel pump circuit back there. Another option you can get is one of these. It's just a little relay bypass. When you turn that on, now you've bypassed the relay, and the fuel pump circuit should just have power, full-time power. As you see, we have full-time power back there. So we've proved that there's nothing wrong with the load side of the fuel pump circuit. We're providing full-time power, the test light is lighting up, which means the fuel pump should be running. So that must mean that there's something wrong with the control side of the relay. So let's go to the whiteboard. I'll draw a relay really quick and kind of explain how it's supposed to work. So a relay is actually just a pretty simple device. It's an electromagnetic switch. There's a load side to the relay and a control side. The load side is what we've been testing so far, pins 30 and 87. Pin 30 has 12-volt power coming from fuse 47. And pin 87 goes out to the fuel pump, and then the fuel pump is grounded. So when the fuel pump relay is energized, this switch closes, and that power can flow to the fuel pump and operate it. And that's what we've been testing so far by bypassing this relay, by connecting pins 87 and 30 together and putting a test light over the other ends. We've proved that that circuit is fine. There's nothing wrong with that circuit, and the fuel pump can run. So that led me to believe that there's something wrong with the control side of the relay circuit. So what I did was I tested for 12-volt power in pin 86. There's also full-time power on that one, and it was there. So I was focusing in on the DME. This is a ground side switched relay, which means that there's full-time power on pin 86, and the DME will apply ground on pin 85 in order to energize the coil circuit. When that happens, the switch is closed because this thing turns into an electromagnet, and it closes the switch and it provides power to the pump. So that wasn't happening. And I tested that by hooking my test light between pins 86 and 85 and cranked the engine, and the test light did not light up. So that led me to believe that there's something wrong with this circuit. For some reason, we were not getting a ground signal during cranking. So what I did was, rather than start to go into start to open up wiring harnesses and things like that, I just went right to the DME. In the engine compartment, took the cover off, I found the pin on the DME, connected my test light to 12-volt power, and put it on the appropriate pin, cranked the engine, and we did not have a circuit. So that proved that the DME was not grounding the circuit while cranking.
So I was not happy at this point because my whole diagnosis led me to believe that the DME was bad. And that was not the way I was hoping that this problem would go. I was hoping for a bad fuel pump and I got a bad engine computer, and that was a much bigger problem. So I just decided to call it quits there for the night and tackle it fresh in the morning. But the next day I didn't do that. I went and I got a new battery because that was on my to-do list, and the battery on this thing, you know, it was bad, and I had to actually use my jump pack to supplement it in order to crank the engine, because the battery didn't quite have enough juice to continuously crank the engine. So I was using my jump pack that whole time and everything, and the engine was cranking fine, but the DME wasn't applying ground on that pin. And anyway, I went and got a new battery. And today I stuck it in. Today I started checking things, and now all of a sudden we have power while cranking. So turns out there's nothing wrong with the engine computer, and it was just a bad battery the whole time, and I'm an idiot for just even trying to do a diagnosis with a bad battery. So lesson learned there, and hopefully you guys learn that too. Don't try to do a diagnosis when you have a bad battery. Go out, get a good battery, and then you can proceed with your diagnosis. So let's do that. Now that we know that there's nothing wrong with the engine computer, and the engine computer is commanding the fuel pump on, as evidenced by our test light lighting up while we were cranking it earlier. We now know that there's nothing wrong with that side, and there's definitely something wrong with this fuel pump, possibly. So yeah, I'm happy to see this. I'm happy to see that our fuel pump circuit is actually working. Let me go and turn this off. Put our relay back in. All right, guys, so now where are we at? We know for sure that the fuel pump will work. We know for sure that it's provided power by the engine when it's starting, but we know that there's no fuel pressure going to the engine, and that's why the engine's not starting. Now, what are the possible causes of that? So to my mind, there are three possibilities that could cause this situation. Number one, the fuel filter is completely clogged. Number two, the fuel lines are clogged somewhere. I kind of discount those possibilities because, like I said, my friend was driving along and it just stopped one day. So that kind of doesn't really make sense. Plus, I wouldn't expect a complete absence of fuel pressure. That I would figure there would be some, even if there was a clog. So that brings us to the third possibility. The fuel pump assembly is it's like a big plastic assembly. And the fuel pump is just a little metal fuel pump down at the bottom. It sits down at the bottom of the tank, and it needs to pump fuel up to the top of the tank, which is the part we've been looking at. So there's a little plastic corrugated tube that runs from the pump to the top of the fuel assembly. And if that tube was cracked in half, we would get the situation we're seeing here, where you can hear the fuel pump running, it's pumping fuel, but it's just going back into the tank. That's what I think is happening. So we need to actually remove this fuel pump in order to see if I'm right. So we just got to get this little metal guy off. Stick your screwdriver in here, open it up a little. You guys are falling backwards. Okay. Open it up. So you got to get it off that little guy. We're not going to be reusing that. We'll just put a normal worm clamp on it. I think I do have more of these kinds of clamps though, if I can find that whole kit. Okay. Gotta work around my light here. Cool, a little bit of residual fuel. Now this thing is just on here clockwise. I just need to sort of tap it with a hammer. Just like that. I'm gonna tuck this line over here. Okay. I'm hoping to see this yellow tube. I'm hoping to see that thing is broken.
Am I right? I don't think I'm right. Oh, that's a bummer. I was really hoping I was right. Okay, let's get this out of here. Okay, so my theory wasn't right. That's okay. We haven't spent any money yet. We're just diagnosing this thing. We're trying to figure out what's wrong. So that didn't cost us anything. We looked, we saw the corrugated line is intact. So I think my next step is going to be to see if this fuel pump can actually pump fuel. Even though you hear it spinning, that doesn't mean it's pumping. So let's connect some tubing to the top of the fuel pump there. We'll plug it in. We'll try to crank the engine. We'll see if it pumps out any fuel. We'll stick the end of the hose into some kind of container. If it doesn't pump any fuel, fuel pump's bad. You can hear it spin, but it's not pumping. If it does pump fuel, then there's probably a clog in the line somewhere between the engine bay here and the end of that where the fuel pump is. All right, guys, I got some fuel line, put it on there, got it stuck in a beaker over there. Let's sit you guys down so you can see that. Cool. All right, hey, we got to reconnect the fuel line, don't we? Or the fuel pump. Here, let me get this out. Out of the center there, so I can just stick it on. Okay, we're plugged back in. Okay, we're gonna crank. Nothing's coming out of there. Well, I think we have our answer, guys. That fuel pump, even though it runs, does not pump fuel. You know, maybe, why don't we do this? Just to make sure, it's always a possibility that there's something wrong with the electrical line somewhere and they're not able to pass enough current to run that pump. We were powering it with the power probe. Let me get the power probe back out, stick it on there. We'll prove that it's running, because you guys couldn't hear that a second ago while the car was cranking. So we'll prove that it's running and not pumping. That'll be our definitive test. Okay, we did confirm that it is the white wire that has the power, the positive. So I need to apply the power on the left pin and the ground to the right in order to get this thing to run correctly, in the correct direction, I believe. Get you guys the shot of that. Power this up. No fuel coming out the hose at all. Heard the pump going, no fuel coming out. That pump is junk. Now I gotta buy a fuel pump. All right, it's like 3 days later, I got a new fuel pump. I'm not gonna film that. You guys already saw earlier in the video how to remove and replace one, so I'm just gonna stick it in and we will get this car started. All right, guys, let's confirm that this one pumps fuel. Can you guys see it? I hope so. Whoa, whoa. Okay, why did that pop off like that? Is there an obstruction in this freaking line? Oh geez, there's a plug in this line. The guy gave me the end of the brand new line. Jesus, that was funny. All right, I think we know that this thing is pumping fuel though, so I don't think we need to repeat this test. Let's just move on. Oh, that was kind of funny. All right, let's get this fuel that kind of sprayed. Dry it up. Got to get a new clamp for this line. So that clip was a 153, and I don't have a 153. I have a 145 and a 157. So let's go for the 145 and see if we can actually get it on there, because maybe we will. A smaller would be better. Yeah, I think that's gonna work. Darn, I should have put the thing the other way. That's all we needed. Lesson learned, put it on the right way. Okay. Now, just get this little guy. This tool comes with the kit. And you squeeze. That definitely ain't coming off. In case anybody's interested, this is that kit. That's what it looks like. Comes with all these different sizes and the pliers too. You can get that on Amazon. I'll throw a link to it in the description. All right, guys, let's hope that was the only problem with this car. Here we go. Yeah. There we go. Ooh, we gotta get some oil pumped up into those valves. Yeah, the valve train's super noisy there. The thing sat for 3 years, so all the oil drained out of the lifters. You gotta get those pumped back up. Basically, you gotta run the engine at speed for a good 5-10 minutes, something like that, and it should quiet down. So super happy we solved the problem. It was a fuel pump after all. That's the first time that's ever happened where the fuel pump's running but not pumping. So that's kind of weird, right? But hey, there you go. That's how you diagnose the problem. So if that fuel pump, the old fuel pump, had been pumping fuel, that would have proved that there had to be a blockage somewhere in the line between the pump and the engine. I immediately would have suspected the fuel filter, because the fuel filter actually hasn't been changed on this vehicle, and I need to do it, and I will. So I would have gone right to the fuel filter. I would have unplugged the line before the fuel filter, turn the fuel pump on, see if any fluid came out. If it did, that means that the fuel filter would be clogged. If it didn't, that means that the fuel pump was not pumping fuel. And yeah, and then I also would have plugged it back in. Like, let's say the fuel was pumping out of there, I would have plugged it back into the fuel filter and then unplugged the line coming out of the fuel filter to see if fuel was making it through the filter. So that's how, you just kind of diagnose it all the way along until you find the problem. But we found ours and it's all good now. So we solved the problem, the car's running. I'm gonna get the, everything put back on it, and I wanna pull it out and pressure wash it really bad because this thing is so dusty. And then we'll move on with the project in future videos. So anyway, I'm the 50s Kid. Thanks a lot for watching.